you on this show for, I don't know, months now, that the next step for these globalists is to implement a climate lockdown. Forget COVID lockdowns, because you ain't seen nothing yet. The World Economic Forum and Bill Gates have been pushing this new mission. Coming soon, climate lockdowns, the Hill asks. The mission, of course, is to remove fossil fuels and meat from our diet. They plan to force automakers to do away with combustion engines, force companies to implement long-term work-from-home strategies, get as many people off the roads as possible, keep them at home, Zoom calls, do as much as you can. The way Bill Gates paints the picture, those pesky those COVID lockdowns were just the warm-up act. I mean, think about this for a second. He says they hardly move the needle for climate change, Bill Gates says. Think about how many people were home, how many flights were canceled, how many cars were not on the road, how many trains were halted as a result of it. He says that was peanuts. Don't get too excited about it. Here's Bill Gates. He actually pushed for this new lockdown on his website. He has a post called "COVID-19 is awful. Climate change could be worse," he writes. And he says, and I'll save you from having to read the whole thing like I did. I'll give you some of the highlights. He says, sure, COVID was bad, but it was great for the environment.
It wasn't, though. In a study, 49 researchers used 12 models to run 300 simulations of COVID emission reduction. And here's what they found, that they could not detect any associated impact on temperature or rainfall. So it did, in fact, plummet emissions, but it did not actually result in an impact on temperature or rainfall.
So emissions went down, but it did nothing.
Emissions went down, but only for the duration of which people were in lockdowns. And then since, by some measure, like China increased emissions by 4% when lockdowns ended, although I know in some places lockdowns have not ended in China. But very few people would willingly reproduce what we went through in 2020, right? And so emissions actually went back up. But even during those times when researchers modeled that if we reproduced that behavior, it did not actually have any impact on temperature or rainfall.
I mean, someone says, Bill has one hell of a God complex. Someone else in the chat just asked, why isn't Bill Gates in prison yet? Good question.
Well, he did a whole long piece on 60 Minutes about how he loves the environment so much and he's so bullish to invest in things that will help save the planet. And when asked, well, do you not use a private jet? And he goes, no, I do, but I buy offsetting credits. So he's telling us that we need to go back to the anguish that we felt collectively during lockdowns, even though there is no proof yet that it actually worked not to reduce emissions. It did reduce emissions, but that in and of itself didn't actually impact temperature or rainfall. So then should we all just buy more credits? We could use all of his money, buy all the credits, and then we can all do whatever the heck we want.
Right. It reminds me of plenary indulgences, right, in the Catholic Church back in the day. They don't have them anymore. I think it was, I don't know what year you could buy plenary indulgences, right? Catholics, let me know. But you could, basically, rich people could, they could do sinful things, and then they just could buy things and get credits, basically, like carbon offset credits.
It exactly is that.
You could get sin offset credits with the church. That's how it used to work. So back to this Bill Gates piece here. COVID-19 is awful. Climate change could be worse. And he writes, COVID was bad, but it was great for the environment, which Natalie just took the wind out of. He also writes, because poor and middle class people were locked down at home, we reduced our carbon emissions by just 8%. Bill Gates says that's nice, but that's not enough, he writes. He says, basically, we need to 10x our lockdown approach. The only way to do this, that 8% was nothing, we need to 10x it. Of course, it's not surprising then that shortly after that, Bill Gates started pushing these new climate lockdowns on globalists at the World Economic Forum, his favorite buddies, and they started pushing them as well. They all got together, he crafted a book around this idea. Then it wasn't long, of course, before the International Energy Agency, not the Atomic Energy Agency, but the International Energy Agency got on board. The IEA was founded in the 1970s after a big oil spill, and the International Energy Agency demands worldwide lockdowns now to meet climate goals. They want us off of fossil fuels right now. They are demanding a climate lockdown to move us off of fossil fuels.
So if we just live in villages, right, and just walk to the local store, like in Back to the Future 2, right, in these sort of like...
Back to the Future 2 or 3?
What's the one with where they're in the Wild West?
That's 3.
Yeah, excuse me.
2 is in the future, when they go to the future.
Yes.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying here. Okay, this reference may be dumb to many of you watching, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So we need to go back to sort of like that type of village living.
Yes.
Is what they want.
We need to go back to the Future 3.
Okay, but again, I'm going to point out that COVID lockdowns also reduce GDP. And when you reduce GDP, you increase poverty in the poorest regions, which results in lower quality of life for the poorest among us. Right? And so what it seems to me is that these globalists don't want an increase in GDP. They don't want to elevate everybody's lifestyle. They don't want a more empowered population.
No, they don't. Of course they don't. They want, again, this is the plan, right? They want poor and middle class to be in total control, right?
Yeah.
Total control, and they led by a group of globalists. That's been the plan all along. They recently...
think about it. I was just going to say really quick, they got rid of 200,000 small businesses that were competition for the big box stores. So now the big box stores, they had the lower prices while they were competing with the mom and pops. But now that the mom and pops are all gone, they can charge whatever they want for anything.
Yeah, they control everything. They control the entire supply chain. And by the way, when they do these lockdowns, it's not about the rich people. It's not about the Targets and the Amazons and all of that. They get to skirt any kind of laws they want, right? It is the small hair shop. It's the small pet store. It's the small restaurant that gets slammed, right, and gets run out of business. That's exactly what happens.
Well, this is something that's been this started in the 90s. I know I've brought this up on the show before, but it's been a sticking point with me since the 90s, like the late 90s. And that's that when the environmental movement sort of like took off in the mid to late 90s, it was really about personal individual contribution. Like you had to recycle, you had to, not let the water run while you're brushing your teeth. But there's if you add up everything that individuals have done on an environmental scale, it's nothing compared to like a week of Nestle.
Yes.
Just operating normally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's but it's still our fault, but we can't, we have the least impact, but it's our fault. We have to do something about it.
Well, I mean, just look at the military.
Bitcoin mines too.
Look at the military. That's the point, right? The military, and think about the carbon footprint of the military and what they do every afternoon, and we couldn't even, as human beings, we couldn't even come close to what the United States military does if we want to start calling it out, but we will never call it out, right? Because they get an exemption. They're not a part of this plan at all. Of course not. So they recently had a discussion after this Bill Gates, after this meeting, the International Energy Agency came together and started demanding these climate lockdowns and how to make this change. They recently held a discussion on climate change and how to accelerate this plan. Not surprising that they invited as their special guest one Bill Gates. And during this conference, Bill doubled down on doing something dramatic. Governments need to spend a lot of money, but we need way more than that. We need something dramatic, a world locked down. Listen to what he says.
As you just said.
Yeah, I thought that report was very important because, the IEA does such a good job of, tracking what's really going on with energy usage and then projecting out that unless something dramatic happens, both on policy and innovation, the amount of energy we'll be getting from hydrocarbons, even out in 2030, 2040, 2050, will still be very large. And so to have your group come out and say, well, to achieve these goals, here's milestones.
Yeah, here's milestones, right? So we're going to follow these milestones. And if we don't meet them, we need to keep pushing for more and more lockdowns. These are the milestones we need to reach. And the only way we're going to do that is if everyone stays home. And by the way, their 10-point plan is amazing. Don't go to work. Don't use cars on Sundays. Make sure that you stay in your local community. Don't leave outside of your local community. Don't own a car. Don't own a second car if you have multiple people in your family. Don't own a second car. Of course, I'm sure the rich people will comply with all of this. It'll just be the poor people that everyone will be in on the same, right? We'll all be together on this.
Well, if Bill Gates, if he's on par with the United Nations goal to cut emissions by 1.5%, here's some research from Bjorn Lundberg's book, False Alarm. He says, if we are going to do that, this 1.5% goal, right, we would need to cut emissions by 7.6% every year in the 2020s, right? So during the lockdowns, we hit about 4 to 6% reduction in carbon emissions. Now, I know many of you have a problem with using carbon emissions as the metric, but the United Nations does. So let's just use it, right? So in 2020, if we only hit 4.6%, we didn't get to that 7.6% that we would need to make any impact on temperature reduction. Not only that, we'd have to do it every year. So we failed in 2020. We have to go 7.6% lower in 2021. We didn't do that. We're not going to do it in 2022. So basically, they're saying that in 2020, it should have been worse. And we need to have twice as much of an impact in 2021 and 2022, right? So even the lockdowns we already went through were not good enough. We need to have voluntarily doubled their impact, which I guess meant not ordering on Amazon, not ordering Uber Eats.
Well,
right?
doubled is one thing. He's basically calling for 10x that. So forget doubling, because that really only gets us to 16% emissions reduction is based on Bill Gates's numbers, his math that he highlights in his study.
Yeah.
Right? So we really need 10x it to get there, to get close to 100% or even 90% reduction, right? That's what his plan is. By the way, so this speech that Bill Gates was invited to do was called a fireside chat. I just want to put this up on the screen. This was the actual name of their event. Bill Gates in a fireside chat. It's with Breakthrough Energy founder. So they called it a fireside chat. Does anyone else see the irony here in labeling this a fireside chat?
Yes.
How exactly are you going to have fire without fossil fuels or wood?
Right. Or deforestation, right? Also,
we're going to gather up around the fire and have a little fireside chat with Bill Gates.
Maybe he has one of those computerized Yule logs behind him, because he doesn't look like he's anywhere in a space.
Maybe, it's a fake.
It was
it's
a hologram.
Fake fire. It's just a fake fire with electricity. So anyway,
they're not calling it Putin's climate crisis.
Oh, I'm sure they will. Oh, by the way, they did today. By the way,
Not calling it that yet.
Oh, geez.
In a roundabout way, we actually had who was it? I'll have it for you tomorrow in the newsletter. But an advisor for the EU said we need to keep sending weapons to Ukraine because that will lower our energy costs. Like, think about that logic for a second. She literally said that.
I don't understand that at all.
Well, then you're on the side of then you're with Putin.
Oh.
So climate activists are pushing for a total climate lockdown. Here's the mission now. You can read for yourself at climatelelockdown.com. Yes, a website admission called climatelelockdown.com. Here's their website with the hashtag #ProtestInPlace. You can go to their website and watch this little animation here pop up. Kind of looks like I don't know what it does. And you can watch the website. You can scroll down, see protest in place, and they have a whole mantra here. So let's just read this. If you think the COVID-19 pandemic is bad, wait till you have see how climate change will hit us in the rear of the future if we do nothing now. Can you?
I think that says in the near future.
Can you take that full again? My eyes are so bad. Sorry.
I can read it.
I was trying to read it from afar, and it's like hard for me to see it across here. So let's see here. Let's see.
Hang on.
There we go. So if you think the COVID-19 pandemic is bad, wait until you see how climate change will hit us in the near future if we do nothing now. With more than half of the planet on lockdown, climate change protests across the globe have been canceled in the absence of collective action convincing policymakers of the continued need to work towards a sustainable future. Measures aimed at keeping carbon out of the atmosphere are being swiftly backed. So basically, we need to gather. We need a climate lockdown. We need a protest in place, sheltering in place. That's what we need to do as a form of protest, as a form of resistance. That's what we need to do.
Okay.
In Australia, they've gone even further. The new South Australian Labor government has declared a climate emergency. Climate lockdowns, surveillance of your carbon footprint, and restrictions